good day, everybody. Welcome back live from Jerusalem with Rabbi Aaron Dovid Poston, where in his Beyond the Seven series, we've been teaching the 48 ways to wisdom, and it's such a joy to hear it from Rabbi Poston, who actually was a student of the person who wrote the book. So let's just jump right in and see what he's got for us today. I know that this course keeps getting better and better and better. It's like, wow, just starts to blow minds. But Rabbi Poston, you're looking good and clear today. You're live and on the air, so it's your class, sir. So I'm going to sit back quietly and just absorb as you share Torah.
Hi, Dan. Hi, everybody. Shavua Tov, Chodesh Tov. Glad to be back. We're in a little bit of a different setting here. It's been quite hot, quite warm in Jerusalem this week. So sitting in an air-conditioned room, which is quite enjoyable. I'm sure you can all appreciate that, right? Hope I didn't make a mistake here. Okay, anyway, I'm back with you guys. So tonight,
coming over clear.
You're with me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Here you are. So today's lesson is number 28 in the 48 Ways to Wisdom. So for those who are not familiar with this idea, the 48 Ways to Wisdom is a compilation of a lecture given by Rav Noach Weinberg. It's based on the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that describes, the truth be told, describes the 48 character traits that one should acquire in order to receive the revelation at Mount Sinai. And so, it was 49 days. 49 days review, but basically it's things you need to either work on or prioritize in your life.
Integrate, yeah.
If you want to acquire wisdom. Now, some of these things are so obvious, and some of them are not, right? So today's topic, the subject is Osa Siag L'Dvorav, making a protection, making a fence around what? The question is, what is Dvorav? Dvorav could be your words, or it can mean things, right? Dvar means things, or it can mean word.
Yeah.
So we're going to think about both of these ideas, right? But we're going to start pretty much with things that are precious to you. How do we begin? There's so many things to speak about. Basically, it's creating boundaries for that which is meaningful, right? You have to have. Everyone's looking for meaning in life. The question is, are we conscious? Are we aware? Have we made the proper cheshbon hanefesh, the proper accounting for what is meaningful? And once we have come to that conclusion, hopefully, especially after last week, finding happiness, the secret to happiness and gratitude, once we've realized what's important, now the next step is making sure that those ideas or those things are protected. Right? If you hold it so dear, and we'll call it preciousness, right? It could be family, right? It could be Torah learning. Whatever it is that is important to you, you have to find ways, creative ways to protect. Now, the truth is the Torah actually commands the leaders, the rabbis, to create these protections. I'll give you the verse. We'll start off with this verse, but basically, just because they're actually commanded, as you'll see, so too we also should take this principle into our life. So, for example, if you go to Leviticus chapter 18, verse 30, if you want to read it.
18 verse 30 reads, "And you shall observe my charge, not to commit any of the abominable practices that were done before you, and you shall not become defiled by them. I am the Lord your God."
Now, for those who are not so familiar with Hebrew, I have to explain or translate. In the Torah pasuk says, "Ushmartem et mishmarti." You shall guard. Shamar or shomer is a guard. So God is telling the leadership, right? You shall guard my guardings. His guardings is the Torah, right? What he cherishes, we just discussed this idea, what you cherish, you will protect. You'll find ways to protect it. So he wants us to protect the protection, right? The Torah itself is our protector, meaning it's Hashem's word, and God wants us to protect it. So the rabbis have made, I think that's pretty much everything that is rabbinical, you could put down and, like summarize the idea that they are protecting us from ourselves, right? We have a Yetzer Hara, we're lazy, we're this, we're that. We have a lot of issues, let's say, that we need to protect ourselves from. Like I mentioned, okay, it could be laziness, could be addiction, could be all kinds of things. Just simple taivas. I'll give you an example, like in terms of marriage. So, truth be told, the Torah itself commands us not to be mensch, and it applies to women too, who are married. Men should not be alone with a woman who's married to another man. I mean, this woman also should not be alone, right? We know the whole idea of sota. If you're not familiar, look it up, S-O-T-A, right? The sota. So she has been secluded with another man, her husband's jealous and whatnot. I'm not going to go into that, but the idea is that King David, everybody knows and loves King David.
For sure, yes.
Instituted, imagine the genius of King David, that one should not be, a man should not be alone with an unmarried woman. That's called a rabbinic decree. So for all those detractors out there who say, who are the rabbis to make up these laws? Isn't that genius? Just think about our society today, with whether it's politicians, doctors, I don't know. I don't want to go into the possibilities.
In compromising situations, yeah.
Sure. So it's called a guard, my guardings, right? Do not even be alone in a secluded room, locked room, whatever, a secluded area with a non-married woman, even though, according to the Torah, it's actually permitted, right? But the rabbis came, and I say the rabbis,
technically,
King David, right? And it was instituted, it was accepted by King David and his Beis Din and his court. So basically, let's just think of it on a more, just practical level. You have a house that's sitting at the edge of a cliff. Of course, you're going to build a fence because you have kids, right? Maybe you have some confidence in yourself. I don't know.
But you don't want your grandkids going over it.
You have You have a hole in your property, so you're going to put a fence around it. Of course, if you have a pool, everyone knows that even society, I think, well, at least with the municipality that I grew up in, you could be sued by the city if you have a pool without a fence, meaning in your yard. I can't imagine anybody, with any seichel, unless you live like out in the middle of nowheresville, perhaps, maybe there's no
some uncivilized area. Canada is a big place, Rabbi, just so you know, so I wouldn't say it's uncivilized. We have beautiful laws of the land, a lot borrowed from the United States, but we still have broad, huge, vast areas, tundra, if you will. And, so.
I'm sure that anybody that has a medicine cabinet, either it's raised high off where children can't reach, or they even have a lock on it. Everyone knows the medicine cabinet is, kids look at, I guess, these pills and they might think they're candy. So everyone would do everything they can to keep these things out of the reach of children. They have, I think they're called, I don't know what they're called, child locks or locks. It's a simple thing, a mechanism that makes it difficult to open a cabinet.
Even for cleansers underneath the sink. Yeah.
That's what people make. So why do you have that? And as soon as you tell your child not to play with the protector, right? The protector's there, and it's not foolproof, right? The kid will become a genius one day and figure a way into the cabinet, especially if he thinks there's candy in there, right? So we all make up our own. We're supposed to be creative. To let's say you have a gun. In different states there are actually rules and laws. Here in Israel, you have rules. Many people have guns, and we know it's an epidemic problem in America. Whatever. I don't want to go into it, but basically there are things that you could do to secure your gun, whether it's separating the ammunition, whether it's a lock on the trigger, whether it's an actual safe, or a hidden place that that a child cannot reach. whatever the rules are, you have to follow them, right? Everyone knows you have to protect your money. I mean, that's why you have safes, even safe deposit boxes. Many Orthodox Jews do not have a television, right? Just to get into this whole idea. Why? Because there are things on the telly that are they're not safe for children to watch, and even adults, right? There are things that we have on computers called a filter, right? I don't know, maybe there's another name for it, but it's basically a filter that could keep pornography off, or certain, I guess you can put in the URLs, and then that would prevent it from ever opening up these pages. I mean, I really don't know that much about these ideas. That parents would be wise for them to tell their children not to bring their iPad or their phones, their smartphones, to a meal, right? It's family time, right? Where do you come up with these rules? Why are those? Because the family time is precious, right? We're talking about protecting what is precious. So if you're smart and you want we're talking about how to gain more wisdom. You know that you're happy, what makes you happy, what you're living for, and therefore you want to protect that. So wisdom, I mean, if people just watch anything on television, or they just do anything on their phones, it drains you from really, critical thinking. So basically, one thing you have to come to understand, and perhaps everything we talked about up until now, especially happiness, but you have to know what is precious. You have to decide. You have to come to this idea. And then the next stage is not to place yourself in a position of temptation, right? We have rules, right? Even though maybe they're not all written. I mean, in our Shulchan Aruch and in our Musar literature, it's quite clear that if in the Gemara, you have a option to get to a place, but you have several options in terms of like rerouting, right? You can look on Waze or Google Maps, how to get from point A to point B. And it gives you 3 possible routes. One might be longer, one might be shorter, but the one that's shorter goes through, let's just say, the red light district, or it goes along the beach route, which means you have access to the beach front, which may mean, it's not an empty beach. So you have to choose. Do I want to be righteous, or do I want to be a Russia? Do I want to be evil? And therefore choose, even if it's a longer route. Of course, whatever, that's within reason. If you're driving somebody to the hospital and every minute counts, then don't be a fool. Just watch your eyes, so to speak. So you have to know what's precious and what's meaningful. And you can create, the rabbis have already created so many fences. And we'll see real quickly, there is a Pirkei Avot, if I have it here. It's really the first one. The very first Pirkei Avot. That's chapter 1, Mishnah 1. It's really the last few words, but if you want to read it from the beginning, if you have it available, otherwise I could read it.
I don't have it up, Rabbi. Sorry.
It's okay. So Moses received the Torah from Sinai, and he gave it over to Joshua. Joshua gave it over to the elders to the prophets gave it over to the men of the great assembly. They, right, meaning the men of the great assembly, would always say these 3 things. Okay? It's really the third, but we'll hear the whole thing. Be cautious in judgment, slow in judgment, establish many students, and make a safety fence around the Torah. Right. Vasu siag litorah. These are our words. Really, oisa siag lidvorav, again, either means things or words. That which is precious, and the Torah, I hope and believe that anybody listening to this class would understand that the Torah is very precious. So let's talk about Shabbat for a second, right? So Shabbat is very precious. We have to admit, even if you're a non-Jew, you understand that you're celebrating or commemorating Shabbat on some level. But for us Jews, we have a tremendous amount of more obligation. But you can also adopt some of these ideas. Again, when it comes to I was thinking about this today, just like chilling, like we're in a rat race all week long with our cell phones and our computers and all kinds of electronic devices. That I was thinking to myself, and I actually shared this with somebody. He not only agreed with me, he gave some data to back it up. That I felt that let's just say like this. You don't really realize when you're using all these machineries and all these technology that it's affecting your body, it's affecting your brain waves, it's affecting your own energy. Basically, it may be invisible, right? And it may be very subtle. But just touching the machine, obviously it has a battery, it has electricity, but that it's affecting you in ways that you're not even aware of. Right. I'm sure your brain
especially
is
5G
wired in a certain way. I've heard this idea. But maybe just pushing buttons, constantly thinking about where you're going next if you're surfing the web. Here you're talking about total cessation, just connecting with the now. And so there's a thing called muksa. In Judaism on Shabbat, I won't even touch my iPhone. I won't touch a pen here, right? I have a pen. Why will I not even touch it? Because I'm not allowed to write. The very fact that I'm not allowed to write is a Torah prohibition. The fact that I'm not allowed to touch, I shouldn't even touch the pen or move the pen, is a rabbinic injunction to prevent me from coming to write. This may be like crazy for some people who never heard this idea before. So we call it muksa. Anything that is set aside that I have no use for, I will not even touch. It's prohibition, a rabbinic prohibition. So there's, what's wrong with riding an animal? Okay, you may say that it's using your animal, you shouldn't be using it. But the rabbis come along and say you shouldn't ride the animal because what usually happens is people break a branch off in order to hit the animal to go faster or to steer the animal in some way. So the prohibition is breaking the branch. It's a rabbinic prohibition to use to ride the animal. You're not allowed to tie and break off branches, as I already mentioned, and tie. So how would you make a raft? So the point is that they say you shouldn't even swim, right? On Shabbat, we don't go swimming. Okay, you can put your feet in the pool, right? You can walk along the beach, but there's certain things you won't do for various reasons. Once you go into the pool, into the water, the main reason is you might go ahead and build a raft, and that would be a problem. But there's other issues, such as squeezing out your hair or squeezing out your bathing suit. Okay, we're not going to get into all the ideas, but the rabbis have made so, and this is like not going back to like 100 years or 200 years. We're talking about already when they were in the desert for those 40 years and after when they entered the land of Israel. So many of these laws, and we're talking about the time of Ezra, when we came back from our exile and we landed ourselves back in Jerusalem and we saw people not keeping Shabbos, right? They weren't keeping Shabbos properly, and that's when there was a rejuvenation, a revitalization of Jewish culture, if I may say so. And they instituted all kinds of extra stringencies with a condition that once the Jews started to get back into Shabbos the way they always had kept it, then these extra stringencies would be released. They would be released from having to keep all these stringencies. And that's just part of our history. So you see how, if you consider something precious, you'll go out of your way to, I guess, safeguard it, to make sure that it is kept precious. So I hope that gives like some background and some idea. And so it's not just, it's so we don't weaken Shabbos, right? It's to strengthen the Shabbos by creating, there's an idea that says, I hope I'm not going to misquote it, but basically good fences make good neighbors, right? you want to keep that person as a good neighbor, then you have to set boundaries. You can't just come into my house at any time, right? Call first, text first, whatever it is. Let's make an appointment, right? If you have your neighbor just walks through your door, I'm not going to say they're not going to become a good neighbor. Right now, they're a good neighbor, and you want to keep them that way. So to strengthen that relationship, you create boundaries. And that would be true not just in the example I gave, but in relationships in general. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go through the book a little bit, so we have an idea what the Rosh Yeshiva, he goes through this idea. He begins by talking about fences, guard, and protect, keeping us safe from harm, right? So we talked about the idea of fences around the pool, fences around a hole in wherever you have a cliff or a hole. So that's very important.
You don't want to cause harm, yeah.
So basically, he goes into this, we'll call it a little bit more philosophical. What happens if you find a hole in your life, right? So you need to make a fence to prevent yourself from falling in. You don't want to hurt yourself or others. So what you need to do is to create your own boundaries. You have to have methods that will help you avoid stumbling into these errors. And many times we fall in over and over and over again. Right now, I checked it out. Albert Einstein did not say this. Maybe it's a lie on the internet, but I looked it up, and there's a certain website that said a lot of misquotes. So many people attribute it to Albert Einstein, and that is the insanity. What is insanity? The definition of insanity is making the same mistake over and over and over again.
Well, apparently, result.
If we keep repeating that Albert Einstein said it, then we're just basically insane because we're making the same mistake over and over again because he didn't say it. But okay, apparently he didn't say it, and it was attributed really to Rita Mae Brown, and it was as late as 1983. She wrote a book, a fictional book, and she quoted some character in the book as saying it, and that's where it came into being, and it never was Albert Einstein, but maybe it was. If someone wants to do some research and let us know, but I thought it was very interesting that the within this website it mentioned that anybody that says Albert Einstein says it is basically making the same mistake that they're trying not to make. Okay, so what is it? So you find yourself, right? You don't want to fall off the spiritual cliff, right? So you have to be creative and figure out, wait, everyone's different, right? Different people have different taivas, right? Some for gambling, sure. Some for drinking, some for maybe they just spend all their money on artwork and it's ruining their marriage. I don't know. Everybody has their own pitfalls, and they have to figure out a way that they don't keep making the same mistakes over and over again. So how many times have you tried, right, to quit smoking or to lose weight or to stop saying something hurtful to somebody? But we keep falling into the same pit, right? So we talked about cheshbon and nefesh many times. Obviously, it takes a lot of courage to be honest with yourself and know that you made this, resolution, and you just keep failing. So you need to make some kind of a fence. So the first fence you need to erect is to avoid making a promise unless you're absolutely committed to keeping it. And then, of course, once you know what you want, then you figure out ways in which you can really get there, something realistic.
Step by step.
Yeah. You have to ask yourself, do I really mean this? Do I really want it? Is this what is meaningful? Right? Again, what's precious? What's meaningful in my life? And once you really have a firm, stance on this being very meaningful, and you dish it out, hopefully that will then you come to some strategy, as we're about to get into strategies to make it work. So in Mishlei, that's Proverbs 24:6. You want to read?
Yeah, I'm just pulling it up. Proverbs 24, verse 6. Make sure I got my microphone up. Proverbs 24, verse 6 says, "For you shall wage war for yourself with strategies, and the victory results from the superiority of the counselor."
Okay, so King Solomon, in his wisdom, right? You have to admit, wisest man who ever lived. you need strategies if you're going to make war. And this war is not between the Chinese and the Russians in America. We're talking about with your heart, your Yetzer Hara, with your desires,
sure.
your desires that are taking you far away from what you already determined is meaningful in life. So this requires, you can understand, this requires strategy in order for you to be victorious. And that is hopefully our goal. Now, just to skip to this idea, Hillel himself said, right, if I am not for myself, who is for me? This is in Pirkei Avot, chapter 1, Mishnah 15. And if I'm only for myself, what am I?
What
but
am
this
I?
is the main thing. And if not now, when, right?
Right,
Now's
exactly.
the time. Now's the time. Don't be a procrastinator, because you're just going to keep making the same mistakes over and over and again, and attribute this to Albert Einstein. But anyway, the next thing, so let's talk about strategies a little bit, right? Yeah, you make a step-by-step plan that's going to help you live up to your resolution, and he gives different examples. But basically, you know that the time to do it is now, right? Once you decided this is important to you, don't put it off anymore. But if you're not prepared to do it now, so when will you do it? Be sure to set a date and a time which you will put your decision into action. Mark it in your calendar. In other words, this is also a way, it's like creating, look, we're not talking about creating a new religion. We're just talking about creating structure in your life so you can accomplish what you know is important. And sometimes this helps create borders. Here you're just talking about strategy in itself. As you craft your game plan, visualize the possible pitfalls that would arise and devise strategies for avoiding them. And when these obstacles do arise, you must remind yourself, ready? This is it. These are here for me to overcome, to help me strengthen my resolve and grow. This is, my wife reminds me all the time when something, I don't know, people act a certain way towards you, says, it's not happening to you, it's happening for you to overcome, for you to grow. This is now leading into the next idea, which is enlisting the help of others. So for all those unmarried people out there, the truth be told, that if you're lucky enough, like I am, Dan and many other people that we know, our spouses can be a tremendous help, spiritual help, in overcoming so many of the pitfalls. They especially women, they definitely help us men create boundaries. Okay, so keep that in mind. So we're going to go to I think actually we read it in the Mishlei, Proverbs. We already read this in 24:6. He mentions you're not alone. Remember at the end of the verse, it says,
victory results from the
superiority of the counselor. Who's the counselor? You're not alone. One of the most effective fences in getting advice from people who have gone through the same predicament that you're struggling with. Get advice from people who have experienced similar things and overcome. Some have exceeded in overcoming the obstacles, while others are still struggling. But we all have insights and advice you can benefit from. They all have. And they are usually more than happy to share their wisdom. Now, he mentions to get a nudnik, a friend. I guess they have these ideas today of a coach, a personal coach.
Yeah.
What's the word you used?
Life coach.
A life coach. So he calls it a nudnik. You're paying somebody money if you need to. Otherwise, what's a good friend for? Who you can say, look, every time I want to go into that bar, pull me by my bootstraps, right? Remind me of the last time I was there and what happened, right? Whatever it is. So a good way to erect a fence is to hire a friendly nudnik. If you want to diet, for instance, ask a friend to point out every time you take more than one piece of cake or nibble in between meals. He'll help guard against your violating whatever line you've drawn for yourself. Or you can make, like they do sometimes in offices, if people curse or use certain words, or if they fail to, put the toilet seat down, they have to put money into a little pushka, a little bit of a tin can or something like that. In other words, hang out with the right people, first of all, right? Help boost each other up. So you're not in this alone, and maybe that is a way of what's the word of you know um, enticing you to do the right thing. If you know that there's a penalty, a financial penalty, it might help. So then, if we're going to go to Koheles, which is Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 9 and 10.
Chapter
This is
4.
this is going along the idea of you're not alone, right?
All right, 9 and 10 say, two are better than one, since they have good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his friend, but woe to the one who falls and has no second one to lift him up.
Now Rashi mentions this is like a wife, right? Hopefully this is the idea. Whether it's a good friend, a trusted comrade, right? Good people you're hanging around with, but two are better than one, right? Two are better than one, since they have good reward for their toil. If one would fall, the other one would lift them up. I'll read Rashi, right? Two are better than one in all respects. Therefore, a person should acquire for himself a companion and take his wife, for they have more profit in their toil. Much work is done by two, which the individual does not begin alone. Now, if they would fall, according to its apparent meaning, that's obvious. And regarding studies, if his studies were too difficult for him, his companion will restore them to him. And if he stumbles and was not exacting what he heard from his mentor, his companion will set him on the truthful course. And as many of your students, people who watch this know, one of the main things in Judaism, the way people study, is through chavruta, right? You're sitting there trying to get to the truth, and you're trying to read a text, and you're trying to explain it over. And if you're not clear, your study partner will say, you don't know what you're talking about. That's not what it says. Or could you elaborate further? And you either stick your foot in your mouth further, or you're going to enlighten him, one way or the other. But you see how
Get to the bottom of it. Yeah.
Enlisting the help of others is so important in terms of what we're talking about, protecting that which is precious.
Yeah, stops tunnel vision.
Now, the next idea is pitfalls. There are always pitfalls ahead. So we talked about the idea of making mistakes over and over again. So King David says in Psalms 51:5.
So 51, verse 5 reads, for I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me.
Now, this is interesting because he's trying to tell us you have to remember your mistakes. They can serve as an effective deterrent by repeating them again and again, because it helps you remain aware of the potential pitfalls, and it helps keep your guard up. The whole idea of preserving that which is precious to you is keeping a guard up. So one of the ways of keeping a guard, setting boundaries, is not to forget. Review your past mistakes frequently and learn from them, okay? The next subject or topic is planning ahead, right? I don't know if it's still true. Now you have, what do you call these phones, these smartphones. But used to go, I remember, we went to wherever we went. We were going on a road trip. You go to the local gas station, you fill up, and they had maps. I don't know if they still have maps. Maybe. So how would you expect to get where you're going without a map? I mean, okay, today you can go online and you can get the best route, as we talked about earlier, or you can do it live as timing. But basically, planning ahead is a big deal when you're going on any kind of road trip.
Yeah, we have navigation systems in our car now.
Yeah.
Quite often.
Okay, so I would, look, what happens if you're on the road and it went out for some reason? I don't know. I mean, it's possible. I don't want to give anybody.
It goes out of date, though. Yeah, especially with some new cities building new roads. Yeah, the navigation systems go out of date.
So it would make sense. Plan ahead, right? If you're going to travel in Europe, right, you'll first read a travel guide, find out what to expect, right? What's the culture like? What do people do at nightlife? What's the proper thing to say in a restaurant, to tip or not to tip, whatever it is, right? You don't just show up. You don't want to miss any important things or experiences. There's guides. You imagine going to Jerusalem and never going to the Western Wall or to Yad Vashem, you're going to come to Jerusalem, you're going to know what's important. So the same thing is true about life, right? You don't just show up, right? Be prepared. Many people plan on getting married. So the Roshi would ask, how many people want to get divorced? How many of you are planning to get divorced? Well, obviously nobody raises their hand. Well, guess what? If 50%, 40%, 60%, I don't know, I can't keep track. Let's just say a large percentage, it could be 30%, I have no idea, of people get divorced. Well, guess what? Now's the time, before you even get married. Figure out what is a good marriage, what goes into it. And so anyway, planning ahead, right? Nobody plans on getting divorced. But it's silly to think it couldn't happen to you. To avoid this painful occurrence, learn what you need to do to build a lasting, loving marriage. And think ahead. Consider the other pivotal phases that you're going to experience in your life. What about your career? What about parenthood, marrying off children, retirement? And resolve to get the wisdom you need in order to navigate these bewildering phases. So planning ahead is essential. What are you living for? This was, I think, one of the main things that Rosh Yeshiva always spoke about, right? It just in terms of, let's say, there are people that say, I would die for, right? I would die for a particular cause. Well, guess what? What are you living for, right? Mm-hmm. If you're willing to die for that, it means you're willing to live for it as well, right? We have so many Jews, Baruch Hashem, these are my people, who would say, I would die for the state of Israel, or I would die for the Jewish people. But they're not at all observant. They're not at all, I don't like the word religious, but observant. And yet they would be willing to die for the Jewish people. I commend it. I think it's great. But, hello, what are you living for? I mean, if you really think it's that important, you would put your life on the line and die for the Jewish people. Why wouldn't you live for the Jewish people? Right? And this is like one of the most famous expressions that Rosh Yeshiva gave to new people coming into his yeshiva who were like just backpackers traveling through the world. Focus. What is the most important thing? So the most important fence you can make is to ensure you don't waste your precious life. The best protection you have against this is what we've been talking about all along, cheshbon hanefesh. Make a spiritual accounting. Right? Everyone has to ask themselves this essential question. What am I living for? Attaining clarity about what you want out of life, bottom line, eliminates a lot of confusion, and it guards you from frittering it away. Frittering, I guess, means wasting it, right? In addition to having this general outlook in place, you also need a daily system of evaluating how well you performed and taking stock of where you stand. We talk in Judaism every night before we go to bed. We say the Shema Yisrael, but we make a cheshbon nefesh. We think about our day. Did I hurt anybody? Did I harm anyone? Did I say anything that wasn't right? Could I have done something better? Right? And do we forgive people that we might have felt wronged us? Hopefully the cheshbon nefesh will bring us to the point that at least the next day where we could speak to the people we might have harmed, but at least before you go to bed, know these are traits that you should focus in and work on. He mentions every night before going to bed, look back at the day's events, assess what went right, what went wrong, then make a plan for the next day to be more productive. Right? Identify your own Achilles heel, whether it's laziness, envy, indulgence, or bad temper. Then concentrate on that and remind yourself back to that verse in, I think it was in Proverbs 24:6. Know this is your enemy. This is your enemy that you have to strategize in war, and so that you could be successful and victorious. So identify your own Achilles heel. I mentioned that. Concentrate on that and remind yourself this is the enemy. Get angry at your own stupidities and utilize that anger. In other words, harness that.
That's what it exists for, right?
To motivate you to change. Okay, now building a fence against society's ills. We spoke about having a filter on the internet or not even having a smartphone. It's just amazing, 30, 40 years ago when the idea of a possibility of a smartphone came into being. I remember learning with my rabbi, I'm going to say it was probably 20, let me just think.
I remember 40 years ago having a beeper.
It was only 20 years ago. 20 years ago. And he said that they're developing these types of phones that you could see the person and have a conversation with them. In other words, we already know that's what a
Star
phone
Trek.
is.
Yeah.
Conversation. But you're talking about video, live, up to date. So, you know, you just imagine a yeshiva boy, you know, he's 19 years old. He's engaged to a 17 or 18-year-old girl. And they're on the phone all the time talking to each other. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you have the video, so what happens now? It's 11 o'clock at night. They're both getting a little tired. And they're almost running out of things to talk about. And who knows where this leads. He said, I guarantee you the rabbis are not going to let people, you know, religious people, they're going to suggest this is a no-go zone, right? This is not going to work.
Not going to fly, yeah.
Because we have our boundaries, right? The boundary is, it's fine, you know, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, perhaps. But what's going to happen?
Work-related purposes, yeah.
She wants to get undressed and get into her nightgown, or he wants to get undressed and get into his pajamas or whatever it is. And before you know it, the next thing, you know, anyway, so we live in a society that goes contrary to Torah values in many significant ways. We're assaulted by a degenerate media that promotes hedonism, violence, and immorality. Every Jew and every human being in this needs to erect a solid fence to protect his or her spiritual health, carefully choosing his social milieu and deciding what he will allow to permeate his home from the outside world. I'm just telling you, I remember I was in yeshiva, my first yeshiva. I was 23 years old. I think it was Rav Palm. No, it was one of the Rosh Yeshivas from Chicago. Came to yeshiva and spoke. And I think it was Rabbi Gifter. It was either Rabbi Gifter or Rav Palm. Anyway, I was like shocked. They said bringing a television into one's home, it's like bringing a cross. It's like bringing an idol into your home. I only could imagine. I mean, I lived with television in my home. In fact, we had more than one television. It's a big secret. No, we had a television in every room growing up, right? From the kitchen to the bedrooms to the living room to the dining room, everything. You can imagine that it's like bringing a. I'm thinking to myself, how can that be? I'm sure that there's some good things on television, and there are, right? And so what I found was some of these religious homes, they had a TV without an antenna, and the TV was basically plugged into a VCR. And the VCR, I don't know if anybody knows what a VCR is. It's like an old-time disc
video,
player.
yeah, recording device, yeah.
Video record. And basically, they had kosher tapes that they all shared from one house to another. Stories, history, science, math, whatever it was, educational stuff. And I said, but it's a reality. In other words, I thought when this rabbi said bringing a television into your home is like bringing an idol into your house, I thought, well, these people are, you know, not out to lunch, but like, you know, shooting for the stars. But it's a reality. It can be done. When you know that it can be done and it could save so much headache from what's going on in the world. I mean, right now, I should say the whole world, enough of the world is quite, I'm talking about America, quite upset about, I don't know what's called, this critical race theory. Is that what it's called?
Oh, in the U.S., yeah, they're arguing against it.
People are upset that they're indoctrinating the children with what we would call heresy. I mean, heresy meaning it goes against our values. We don't look at this color of people's skin. We look
so much subtlety out there these days.
The character, right? And so this is something that you want. It's in your house. You want your children to be taught this in school. So we have to make fences, all right? Whether you're going to be homeschooling or you're going to have to go out of your way and choose a different school or go to the board and petition them. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do. And there's some things that are beyond your control that you have to make harder decisions and maybe even costly decisions. But basically, this is something you don't want to bring into your home. So here it says, regarding deciding what we will allow to permeate our home from the outside world, including internet consumption, films and reading material, All these things have a direct value on direct influence on a person's value. Therefore, we're going to end with this idea: set boundaries. Think before you consume. Right? I mean, we can talk about the whole consumer, market, how they, I don't, they basically I forget the word, but they bring the level down on women's values, right? With when you want to watch a commercial for, I don't know, a car, they'll show you the car, but it's all about this woman who's not dressed or dressed. I mean, where's
Rabbi, yeah. I worked auto shows, big international auto shows, and I remember, I was with Jaguar. I did the launch for the '06 XK, and that was a new sports car. All of them, the first time they came out with it, and they brought the entire short-skirted girls from Montreal to Toronto just for that launch. Because of how skimpy they dress, they were just an attraction, and it's shameful in that regard.
So set boundaries. Think before you consume. Freedom. That's what we want. True freedom is the ability to say, "I choose not to partake." That is what we're talking about here: setting boundaries and protecting that which is precious to you. And I'm just going to look over my notes because I do have quite a few other things I'm not sure if there is an idea we might have spoken about in the past, but Chacham Einav Barosho, a wise person, his eyes are in front of him. Now, it means his eyes are in his head, but the word Rosho means ahead of you, in front of you, which means
foresight.
To see. Foresight, that's great. It's to see the consequences of your actions. That's really true maturity. And as we get older, we're able to see it, hopefully because we made the mistakes or we've noticed other people has made mistakes, right? Who's wise? Someone who learns from other people, all learns from everybody.
It doesn't have to go through it, really, because they can foresee.
Yeah. So there's a lot of depth to this. I don't want to go into it, but this is a major point here, that if you want to be wise, because we're talking about the 48 ways to wisdom, learn from your mistakes, learn from other people's mistakes, set the boundaries, right? You can already see the consequences of being alone in a room with that woman, even though she's not married, or picking up a pen on Shabbat, right? Or picking up your iPhone, even though it's off. The next thing you know, it's on. There is just a little bit of like a hint of this in Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 14, which is dealing with neighbors, good neighbors. Hopefully they're good neighbors.
Deuteronomy 19, and which verse, Rabbi?
14.
You said?
14.
14 says, "You shall not pull back your neighbor's landmark, which the earlier ones have set as borders in your inheritance, which you will inherit in the land that the Lord your God gives you to possess."
Okay, so basically, it's one of the 613 commandments, right? I mean, basically, it's stealing, but you're not supposed to infringe. Now, this is not just a real estate argument, right? Where does your border end? Where does your border begin? And then moving somebody's borders, right? It's wrong. It goes all the way to the idea that if I lived in a small town and I want to open a business where someone already has a business,
the same
right?
business,
there are borders there, right? They let's just say a pizza parlor, and let's just say you need like 100 customers to stay in business, and there are only 100 or 125 or 150 customers in this town.
Yeah.
So it would be forbidden for me to open up a pizza parlor that is similar like his. In other words, if it was a little different, it was spaghetti and other things, perhaps it would be okay. But if it's a very similar business, just pizza, so I would have a problem in halacha doing that, because you're infringing on someone else's borders. So you have to set your own borders. You have to know your faith Your parnas is going to come from somewhere else. Don't do it. Same too here. Good neighbors, how's it go? Good borders make good neighbors. So here, you want to have good neighbors, you want to have a good name in the town. Don't infringe on someone else's business. I think this just goes into the same idea here. There's a few other verses that make a lot of sense. Ecclesiastes 10, verse 8.
Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 8 reads, "One who digs a pit shall fall therein, and one who breaks a fence, a snake shall bite him."
Okay, so on a certain level, you're just talking about a regular fence, right? We're talking about the fence that the sages made, the fence that you yourself made. This is where you're going to fall into the snake. So when we think about the rabbis themselves have, as we saw throughout this class, right, whether it's in Pirkei Avot, the first one that the sages should make, and we know that in history they have made many, and it was all for our benefit. So too, that if you break a fence that the sages made, you're asking for it, a snake will bite you. Rashi says, and one who breaks the fence of the sages, to transgress their words, a snake will bite him. Death by the hands of heaven.
Repercussion,
Since he spoke with an expression of breaking a fence, he mentions his recompense with an expression of the biting of the snake, which usually occupies the holes of broken walls of houses. Another verse, Proverbs chapter 21, verse 23.
Proverbs chapter 21, verse 23 reads, "He who watches his mouth and his tongue guards his soul from troubles."
Now, we mentioned at the very beginning that the words asa siyag lidvorav, we translated dvorav as things or concepts, but we also said dvar could be words. So Hashem gave us protections, right? We have lips and we have teeth, and then we have a tongue deep inside somewhere, right? And we have the vocal cords and all that. So before we speak and stick our foot in our mouth, God forbid, or before we hurt somebody, right? We have these borders. We use them. Think twice before you utter these words. The tongue will speak. He who watches his mouth and his tongue guards his soul from troubles. So this really is like full circle. I think we'll leave it there as full circle, that it's not just things, but on a very practical level, it's also speech. But I think that every one of these 48 ways is golden. And I'm not the only resource. I'm not the only source. I told you we're using this book, The 48 Ways to Wisdom. Many, many, many people are
great rabbis have shared
ideas.
and expounded. Yeah,
you could hear from others who you might be able to relate to more. There's just this is gold. This is gold. So continue your search for wisdom and find the tools. And this is just one of many.
Rabbi, what was that verse out of Ecclesiastes chapter 10?
Verse 8.
Verse 8. Okay, that one I found very, very, very key. 10 verses 8. One who digs a pit shall fall therein, and one who breaks a fence, a snake shall bite him. And I think that's some sound words of advice from Solomon on the matter. I mean, we need fences for these reasons. I think you've touched on so much today that is wise for us to integrate. But I love how you talk about having some foresight. You want to have a game plan in play. There's if you think you're going to flutter through life like a kite, you definitely are up for potential crashes and problems. I mean, you've got to have a direction, and I find so many people don't have a compass. They don't know the bearings and direction. And I always encourage get hooked up with a rabbi so you can get put on a learning curve. He's going to teach you how to learn, but also on a learning curve that's taking a trajectory in the upward direction. And I think with everything that we've discussed today, there's a reason why the sages and the wise of that have gone before there's a reason why they've put up all these fences for sure. And you just touched on it, but I think they need to be honored, but understood. Wisdom would understand why. I've tried to get into some and look at why rabbinic. Certain rabbinic rulings are different than halakhic, and you can usually ascertain that there's circumstances that warrant it not being halakhic. Don't make it a law. You can't. They don't make it a law for a reason. But the rabbis that have gone before have made it a fence for your protection, as you've touched on today. So beautiful.
I'll tell you a secret. It makes sense, right? And it's not just politics. There's a statement in the Gemara that says the rabbis will never make a ruling that the people won't accept. First of all, for them, it whittles away their credibility, right? If they make too strong of a
constriction,
and nobody keeps it, then the whole thing's a joke. So it may sound political, right? They'll downgrade it. They'll word it in a way where it'll be. They won't enact something that is not acceptable. And we have over 3,000 years of history that shows what was accepted, what wasn't accepted, and why they decided to, I'll just say, I don't know, retract. I give you an
spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
Huh?
I said a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. And
so what you see in today's Judaism is a collection of what worked. Okay, that worked. What didn't work, I'll give you an example, and it may sound very strange, but
heavy-handed.
Basically, there is a concept after having relations with your wife included. They go to the mikveh. They go to a ritual bath, and it removes a certain type of impurity. Okay? Now, what the rabbis instituted around the time of Ezra was that every man, before he studies and prays, should go to the mikveh. And you know what happened? People stopped being with their wives. Okay, that's what the rabbis said. You have to go to the mikveh. Can you imagine? With my wife the night before I go to sleep, I have to go to the mikveh. I don't want to go to the mikveh. I'm tired. I'm lazy. It's too cold. It's too hot. It's too far.
I don't want to get up early enough to. Yeah.
You know what? I just won't be with my wife. And the rabbi said, no, obviously this is not working.
So
we nixed it. Now, it still says in the Shulchan Aruch that it's praiseworthy to do such a thing. But that's how they word it. It's not an obligation. It's not even strongly suggested in a very, forthcoming way. But the law, this rule was retracted. But if you decide to do it, you get a blessing. But that was, you understand. I hope we're still
No, there's a profound depth in there.
Show.
I sure as heck hope all the B'nai Noach that are out there that are listening realize this. I think you've been very great at bringing this kind of concept alive in this Beyond the Seven series, so that people aren't just thinking that the answers of the sages are just quick thoughts. They're obviously practiced and tested and true in ways.
Oh, wait, another thing. One of the ideas, I just want to make sure people know that when the rabbis, let's just say, make a fence, it's around the Torah. There's always a Torah law or concept that they're trying to protect.
Precious.
They're not coming from left field like, I guess, other religions. They're looking for control or donations. You can talk about the Christian church for all these years. But they're talking about the Torah itself. There's something rooted in the Torah, whether it's a direct quote or a hint.
Don't dabble with, yeah.
That
Don't,
that
yeah.
it would always be attached to. And the Gemara, the oral Torah, much time is spent. Where did the rabbis come up with this idea? We want to know. And therefore, it goes back in time to either a personal account, where they came up with it, or the logic behind it,
A student
proving
brought up
that
something
there
along
was
the way. And
a verse, a hint. Remember, it's a siyag to the Torah. It has to be anchored and rooted in the Torah itself. And you have every right to question, because the Gemara does. Very nice. Rabbi, you tell me this is what we do. Why? Where did it come from? How did it develop? What was the motivation behind the rabbis when they said this is the right thing to do? What prompted them? And this and
purity,
then
holiness, I think.
clarity.
Yeah.
It's like we said, protecting that which is precious. The Torah, there's nothing more precious than Torah. And therefore, to make a siyag around the Torah, guard my guardings. God says, guard my guardings. He says that to the rabbis. And therefore, we are going to follow the rabbis.
It filters. It rolls
also
downhill.
in our own lives, find things to. We're not trying to make things up, but if you find pitfalls, you find those places where you could fall, or you making the same mistake over and over and over again, you need to figure out creative ways to strategize, right? Prioritize, know what's precious, and guard it.
Amen. Amen. Well said, Rabbi. Thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing this course. I know it's a big body of text, and we've made it through 28. We're closer to the end than we are to the beginning at this stage, Rabbi. So it's always good to see you smile. You've been staying up.
I don't see the end. I don't see the end in sight. The only thing I see is the next topic. That's it.
But we're off next week, correct?
Correct. Either we're fasting or feasting. We don't know yet. Right? The Tisha B'Av is a moed. Right? The prophets speak about these rabbinic fasts. And this is another idea. They're called rabbinic fasts, right? From the 10th of Tevis, the 17th of Tammuz, right? The day after Rosh Hashanah, the fast of Gedalia. Tisha B'Av. It's in the Tanakh. It's in the Navi. It's the prophets speak about it. And yet, people want to say, who are the rabbis to make these things up? These are commemorations of calamities. These are days of reflection. These are times where we have to do tshuva. And when our tshuva is heard and when things turn around, these days will turn in, the prophet says, will turn into feast days. Chag, Avoid. So we don't know what's going to happen next Sunday, right? But either way, we can't learn because I'll be feasting or I'll be fasting.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll be back in a couple weeks, Hashem willing. 2 weeks.
That's right. Hashem, please God.
Hashem willing. So yeah, we are going live on the Roku station this week. So I am I've already set up for Beyond the Seven to start playing right back to the very beginning. So if you're going to check out the International Noahide Network on Roku, if you do that sort of thing, we hope you'll enjoy. And I want to thank Rabbi Poston for even allowing me to download and upload some of Rabbi Breidewitz's shiurs. They're just beautiful, beautiful teachings, and everything that he does with Yibbenei. You can always find his material at yibbenei.com. You can find him on YouTube. You can find him on Facebook as well. They're an organization worth supporting, folks, because they do lots of practical outreach there in Jerusalem. And Rabbi Poston, thank you for today's lesson. Beautiful lesson. And we're going to miss you next week, but I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. And may you continually be blessed as you bless many others.
God bless you all.
All right. So have a wonderful day, folks. We'll be back with Beyond the Seven in 2 weeks from today at the same time. Have a wonderful, wonderful week.